You are bleeding right now, not from a wound you would notice, no gash, no bruise, nothing dramatic enough to make you flinch. Just 100 paper-thin cuts, so small each one feels like nothing. $9 here. $14 there, a subscription you forgot you even opened. Individually, they don't hurt. Together, they are quietly emptying you out. This is what subscription creep actually is, not a scandal, not a trick played on you by someone else. It's a slow, self-inflicted blade, and the strange part is it doesn't feel like loss, it feels like comfort. Think about the last time you checked your bank statement and felt that small flinch of, wait, what is this charge? You didn't cancel it, you told yourself you'd deal with it later. That's not laziness. That's your nervous system doing exactly what it was built to do, avoiding a small, visible pain in exchange for a slow, invisible one. A single sharp cut you'd notice and stop, 1,000 tiny ones you adapt to. And adaptation is the most dangerous word in personal finance, because once your body adapts to bleeding, it stops sending you the signal to stop. Here's the part almost nobody says out loud. This isn't really about the $11 app or the streaming service you use twice a year. It's about what those small, repeated withdrawals are quietly replacing. Every dollar that leaves you as rent for access is a dollar that will never become yours. It builds nothing. It compounds into nothing. It sits in someone else's ledger as proof that you paid, not proof that you own. And that's where the real damage happens, not in your bank account, but in your sense of security. You feel financially fine because your access hasn't been interrupted. The music still plays. The shows still load, the app's still open. Your brain reads uninterrupted access as safety. But access was never security. Access can be revoked the moment the payment stops. Security is what remains standing even when the payment does stop. Those are two completely different things, and most people are quietly financing one while believing they're building the other. Give this about 20 seconds, because this is the part that changes how you see every recurring charge for the rest of your life. A wound that never fully closes doesn't just cost you blood in the moment, it costs you the ability to heal. Your body redirects resources constantly to manage it. It never gets to rebuild. That is what a stack of small subscriptions does to your finances. It's not the amount. It's that your financial system never gets a moment to actually repair, strengthen, or grow, because it's permanently managing low-grade loss. Watch what happens the first week you stop the smallest of these leaks. Nothing dramatic occurs. No alarm goes off, and that silence is exactly the problem. The absence of consequence is what convinced you it was safe to keep bleeding in the first place. A financial wound doesn't announce itself with pain. It announces itself years later, as fatigue, as the quiet exhaustion of having worked hard for money that never once stayed long enough to grow roots. Most people think the fix is a single dramatic decision: cancel everything, swear off convenience, live like a monk for a month. That lasts 4 days, then the wounds reopen because the decision was made with willpower, and willpower runs out. What doesn't run out is structure, and that's the part almost nobody teaches because it's not exciting enough to go viral. So follow this for a moment. There is a difference between spending that disappears and spending that stays. When you rent an app, a service, a subscription tier, that money is gone the second it leaves you. No trace. No residue. It bought you a moment of function, and then it evaporated. When you build equity, savings that compound, a skill that increases your value, an asset that appreciates, the money doesn't disappear. It transforms. It becomes something that keeps working long after you've stopped thinking about it. One path bleeds you slowly forever. The other path costs you something once and then starts paying you back. Here is where most explanations stop and where the real shift needs to happen. The problem was never really the subscriptions. The problem is what they represent: a preference for painless, invisible cost over deliberate, visible investment. We choose the $9 bleed 100 times over because it never asks anything of us in the moment. It never requires a decision, it just renews. Meanwhile, building actual equity requires exactly what the bleed avoids: a decision, made consciously, that costs you something you can feel right now in exchange for something that grows later. This is the quiet trade almost nobody names: comfort now in exchange for erosion later. Or discomfort now in exchange for strength later. Every recurring charge is a vote for one of those two futures, and you're casting that vote dozens of times a month without realizing it's a vote at all. And here's the twist that reframes everything you just heard. The charges were never the enemy. You were never careless, and you were never being robbed. Every one of those small renewals was a decision your past self made to avoid discomfort, and that decision worked exactly as designed. It removed friction, it removed the need to think. The bleed isn't a flaw in your character, it's a system running perfectly, just aimed at the wrong outcome. Notice what happens the moment you actually audit this, not judge it, audit it. Most people who go through their statements line by line don't find one obvious villain, they find a pattern. A dozen small leaks that were each individually defensible and collectively devastating. And the moment you see the pattern instead of the individual charges, something shifts. You stop asking, "Is this worth $9?" and start asking a far more dangerous question. What future am I financing with this money? The one where I own something, or the one where I keep renting comfort forever? That single reframe does more than any budgeting app ever could, because it turns an accounting problem into an identity problem. And identity problems are the only kind that actually change behavior long-term. Here's what closing the wound actually looks like, stripped of all the noise. You don't need to cancel everything at once. You need to redirect the blade, one cut at a time, into something that scars over into strength instead of staying open forever. Every subscription you consciously choose to keep on purpose because it earns its place. Every subscription you cancel, don't just delete it, redirect that exact amount automatically into the thing that compounds, not later. Not when you feel like it, the same day, the same amount, moved somewhere it can start building instead of leaking. This is not about deprivation. The people who build real wealth quietly are rarely the ones who look austere. They're the ones who stopped confusing motion with progress. They let convenience serve them occasionally, deliberately, instead of draining them constantly, invisibly. Simplicity done on purpose isn't a sacrifice. It's the most efficient form of power available to anyone because it removes the 1,000 tiny decisions that were secretly making themselves against you. There's a second wound hiding underneath the first one, and it's worth naming before you go. It's not just money that gets rented out this way, it's attention, it's identity. Every time you outsource a small piece of your life to something you never have to build, maintain, or truly understand, you rent a little more of yourself out too. The subscriptions were only ever the visible symptom. The real pattern runs quietly through everything you never chose to own on purpose. And here's the part that should sit with you longer than anything else in this video. The wealthy don't feel wealthy because of what they can access in the moment. They feel secure because of what remains standing when access is taken away. That's the entire distinction between renting your life and owning it. One collapses the second the payments stop, and the other was never depending on the payments to begin with. So look at your statement again, not for the amount, but for the pattern. Somewhere in that list of small, forgettable charges is a version of your future quietly negotiating itself away, one convenience at a time. The bleeding stops the moment you decide it's not comfort you're buying, it's the compounding you're giving up. And once you see that clearly, you can't unsee it in a single subscription again.